50 Brutal History Facts. The Ottomans would allow you to live if you could outrun the executioner in a foot race, usually a 300-yard race around the castle's grounds. It wasn't very often they'd win, as they rarely knew the grounds as well as the executioner. In ancient Rome, if a woman was struggling to conceive, doctors would have her drink gladiators' blood in hopes to help fertility. During the reign of King Henry VIII, if you were convicted by the courts of using poison, you would be condemned to be boiled alive. Ted Bundy worked at a suicide prevention hotline during his time studying psychology at the University of Washington, 2 years prior to his first confirmed kill. When 14th-century Portuguese King Dom Pedro ascended the throne, he exhumed his murdered wife's remains and had his subjects worship her as though she was still alive, even kissing her hand as a sign of devotion. Archaeologists found 2,000-year-old remains of infants in Ecuador wearing helmets made from other children's skulls. They were dated to around 100 BCE. In 1923, jockey Frank Hayes died whilst mid-race. Hayes was still mounted to his horse when his 20-to-1 horse crossed the finish line with Hayes still saddled. It was the only win of his career. In 1757, Prince Sado of Korea went mad. His father eventually locked him in a chest until his demise 8 days later. Ferdinand of Naples took anyone he believed to be plotting against him on a tour of his mummy mansion, a mansion filled with his enemies' corpses. Emperor Qin Shi Huang of China hated educated people so much that he buried several hundred scholars alive during his reign. Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary is the first female serial killer. She was a lesbian countess who murdered hundreds of females. Her crimes were likened to that of a vampire. Ivan the Terrible murdered his own son after he questioned his father's military tactics. Timur, Genghis Khan's descendant, wouldn't allow his men back into camp after a battle unless they came back with 2 severed enemy heads. In the attack of Nanjing, 2 officers had a bet on who would be the first to kill 100 people by sword. They both surpassed that number in a day. At the Battle of Acostaño, more than 3,000 poorly armed Paraguayan militias, composed mainly by children aged 9 to 15, were wiped out by 20,000 Brazilian veteran soldiers. There are books in the Harvard University Library which are bound in human flesh. Persians used to tie cats to their shields during the war with Egypt. This was because it was against Egyptian law to kill cats. In 2011, one of the skeletons at the original London dungeon was discovered to be genuine human remains. The skeletal remains had been there since its opening. Alexander the Great was accidentally buried alive. He suffered from a neurological disorder called Guillain-Barré syndrome. They believe that when he died, he was actually just paralyzed and mentally aware. Up until the 19th century in some parts of Asia, people were executed by slowly being trampled on by an elephant. Sultan Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire had all 280 of his concubines thrown into and drowned in the Bosphorus Strait. An ancient Greek boxer was so jealous of his rival, he attacked a statue built in his honor, resulting in the statue falling and crushing him to death. Ivan the Terrible once had an archbishop dressed in bear skins and then had him hunted by his dogs. Incan Emperor Pachacuti made bone flutes and skin drums from the bodies of his conquered enemies. He also wore necklaces made of their teeth. Roman Emperor Elagabalus would often catapult snakes into the crowds at the arena. King Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter to the gods in hopes for better winds in the sails on his journey to Troy. A mad ancient Greek named Herostratus burned down the temple of Artemis in Ephesus so he could become famous. In ancient imperial China, if you were to be executed, your whole extended family would also be executed, known as collective prosecution. In the First Babylonian Empire, it was customary for surgeons to practice on slaves. If the slave died during the procedure, the doctor would have to legally replace the slave. It was seen as a great dishonor to be crucified in ancient Rome. First-class citizens were often more afraid of this than death itself. The Romans had a method of execution where they would pull together 2 trees and tie them to each of your legs before they cut the ties on the tree, causing them to thrust back to normal and splitting the condemned in half. Jim Robinson was hanged in now San Diego in 1852. He was too tall for the drop. His feet subsequently touched the ground. He struggled to his death for almost 40 minutes. Philip II of Spain proposed to Elizabeth I. She rejected him, later to fight against him in the war with the Spanish Armada. John Wayne Gacy's victims were so compact together in their makeshift graves, their bones fused together. Out of the 110,000 German soldiers taken prisoners of war during the Battle of Stalingrad, only 5,000 made it home to Germany. It is thought that the wife of George Boland falsely gave evidence against him in his trial, supporting the idea that he had an incestuous affair with his sister Anne Boleyn. Thomas Jefferson preached against white people having children with black people whilst simultaneously having several children with a black woman. Pope Pius IX kidnapped a Jewish child and had him raised as a Catholic. In 1906, Coney Island Zoo displayed a young Filipino child. Spectators threw peanuts at her. In 1937 New London, a school teacher turned on an electric sander without knowing there was a natural gas leak. An explosion occurred, killing 300 teachers and students. Dead females in ancient Egypt were left to decay for a bit longer before being prepped for burial because of the sadistic reputation of the body preppers. On the attack on Nanjing, Japanese soldiers were recorded throwing Chinese babies in the air and attempting to catch them on their bayonets. One of the reasons why Vikings started to venture out into the world was because of the problem with their views on women. They left baby girls out in the cold to pass away in the harsh conditions. In 1945, the Soviet Navy sank a retreating Nazi warship named MV Wilhelm Gustloff, killing over 9,000 Nazis. After Mary Queen of Scots' execution, the executioner picked up her head by her hair, not knowing it was a wig. Her head rolled onto the floor. In 1999, Gamil El-Badawi deliberately crashed Egyptair Flight 990 after locking the pilot out of the cockpit. 217 people perished in the crash. Police attempted to find out who Jack the Ripper was by photographing the victim's eyes, in hopes the killer's image would be stored in the retina. Octavia Hatcher from Pikeville, Kentucky was buried alive. She fell into a coma from an illness. Locals buried her believing she had died. Octavia woke up in her coffin. Alexander III ordered monks and priests to stop performing bloodletting anymore, so barbers started offering the service instead. This is why barber poles are red and white, to represent blood-stained towels hanging up to dry. The Vikings first sang their own version of London Bridge is falling down when they attacked the bridge in 1014.